Hello and welcome to Taiwan Talks. I'm Yin Kavat. Japan refuses to remove Taiwan from an event in Denmark, while in the Pacific Islands, leaders back Taiwan's right to participate in their regional gathering, even as China pilots a surveillance village on the Solomon Islands. Then, the US's de facto embassy here disputes China's version of Taiwan's status. Could this be a shift in US Taiwan policy? Plus, Pete Hegseth calls his Chinese counterpart to say the US will resolutely protect its interests in its priority theatre. Also, Taiwan issues a civilian handbook to prepare the population for conflict and begins subsea patrols to counter cable sabotage. To discuss these stories and more, we're joined by Yuan Yi, National Zhengzhou University Institute of International Relations Adjunct Research Fellow, and Brian Hu, New Bloom magazine founding editor. Welcome back to the show, Professor Yuan and Brian. We were about to be joined by somebody from the Solomon Islands, but because of a blackout, they weren't able to join us. The Pacific Islands Forum, which just concluded in the Solomon Islands, capital of Honiara on Friday, has rejected a push by China to exclude Taiwan from the regional gathering. The final communiqué put Taiwan back in the frame after China succeeded in removing the country from last year's communiqué. This year's forum departed from the normal proceedings by banning all dialogue partners, including China and the US, a move widely seen as a compromise to Beijing's pressure to exclude Taiwan. However, the forum's final communiqué issued on Friday endorsed maintaining, quote, the 1992 leaders' decision on development partners, which is a reference to Taiwan's continued participation in the forum decided by all the leaders in 1992. Take a look.
There's nothing changed. There's no particular concern on anyone's part, any of our leaders' part, and the 1992 decision is still there. It's all leaders acknowledge that, and it's there.
Last month, the Chinese embassy in Tonga falsely said Taiwan, quote, has never been admitted as a PIF dialogue partner or observer. They went on to say it is now time to correct the erroneous Taiwan-related content in the 1992 Forum communiqué. Now, at the Forum, the Pacific Resilience Facility Treaty was signed and ratified after 10 years in the making. As the PIF's first established financial institution, it will reduce the dependency and vulnerability of Pacific Islands in the face of climate change. So far, $162 million has been pledged, including $3 million from Taiwan, 500,000 from China, and $67 million from Australia. Brian, let me come to you first. So would you describe this year's communiqué, at least, as being a win for Taiwan?
Yeah, to some extent, yes, but of course not a complete win. China, of course, as usual, tries to strong-arm Taiwan's presence in international organizations or to deteriorate ties that Taiwan does have with the countries. When it comes to the Solomon Islands, the relations with Taiwan, that is contested. It's a political issue debated internally. And so I think that currently, if it does end up there, that is actually still maintaining Taiwan's presence, or that is a live issue, that things have not been settled in China's favor, so to speak.
How would you characterize the kind of pressure that China brings to bear, particularly on the PIF and Taiwan's attendance or exclusion?
Yeah, I mean, I think in international forums, often it is alleging that there's an international consensus on Taiwan that then any participant in organizations should adhere to. In this case, I think it's also quite interesting to note, though, that Taiwan does become a major division within the domestic politics of the Solomon Islands.
And Professor Yuan, there's another incident that's just come to light. This one is in Europe, but very similar in its aspects. So we're showing on screen now Denmark's paper, The Berlinger, translated, which this weekend reported that the Chinese ambassador to Denmark, you can see him on the front page or on the photo of the Danish newspaper, he interrupted his speech in front of 200 people and demanded that the Taiwanese diplomats were removed. However, he was refused by the Japanese embassy, and then he left of his own accord. And this is what the paper said: the behavior sent shockwaves through diplomatic circles in Denmark. What do you make of this coming to light, as well as, you know, the Pacific Island Forum campaign to exclude Taiwan?
I was asked to leave as I participated into the one NGO many years ago. So it reminds me that this repetitive pattern of interaction has recurring. So I would say for this year, especially after the Tiananmen March, I think the Beijing, it looks like they would take a very forceful gestures.
So you're saying that PLA parade that's just passed, that has given a boost to their efforts to isolate Taiwan?
I hate to say this, but I sense, all right, the parade set a new demarcation line for a very, very comprehensive offensive posture taken by Beijing on all aspects.
Very, very interesting. Brian, Solomon Islands switched recognition from Taiwan to China in 2019. We also hear through Reuters that there's a community on Solomon Islands that will become a surveillance village. What do you make of this news?
Yeah, I think there's long the concern that China will step up police, but also securitize cooperation with countries and that switch recognition. And this may be a case in point. China's often tried to frame itself as, for example, willing to engage in quote-unquote peacekeeping activities, but that may be a way of expanding its security ties, and that could be dangerous. Particularly, it is a question then if, because of the fact there are communities in the Solomon Islands who have long-standing ties with Taiwan, well, what happens if, for example, China tries to surveil them? And that's something that I think is a risk.
Right, because there's a Malaita province, which is actually where our guest was from. The premier there was very pro-Taiwan. So you believe that this could be, because they do say that they will roll this out across the country and use it basically to silence anybody that is against any sort of pro-China direction.
Absolutely. And it's also been stated, for example, that Taiwan does maintain ties with people in the Solomon Islands that are actually in favor of maintaining or reversing this change of recognition going back to Taiwan. And I think it's also a matter that's still unsettled because of the fact that when you switch recognition to China, as we see in, for example, Honduras, that also has led to some trade ties deteriorating. And Taiwan actually was more willing to step up regarding that.
Right. And Professor Yuan, just to get your perspective on this surveillance village, or Feng Chao in China's monitoring model, it seems that they will be taking fingerprints, all of this so-called to curb social unrest.
I've never visited that part of the world, the South Pacific, but I've heard about a lot of reports in this regard. I think for those who have traveled to the place would notice right away that the presence of a Chinese power there. Those area is considered a state without armies because it's so peaceful. Then all of a sudden, the intrusion of this Chinese influence onto the societal aspect, I think that would very much be a technical-driven transformation of the society into a new chapter.
Yeah, and exporting exactly what people have said, that authoritarian model of China as a surveillance state. Now, a statement by the de facto US Embassy in Taiwan about Taiwan's exclusion at the Pacific Islands Forum this year has caused a stir over the weekend in Taiwan, as it represents one of the strongest official US repudiations of Chinese propaganda about Taiwan's status. The statement, in reply to a question by Taiwan's central news agency, expresses regret at China's pressure campaign to exclude Taiwan and goes on to say China intentionally mischaracterizes World War II-era documents, including the Cairo Declaration, the Potsdam Proclamation, and the Treaty of San Francisco, to try to support its coercive campaign to subjugate Taiwan. Beijing's narratives are simply false, and none of these documents determined Taiwan's ultimate political status. Brian, let me come to you. So why is this such a big deal for Taiwan?
Yeah, I think particularly in the Trump 2.0 with the second Trump administration, there's a question of to what extent there will be support for Taiwan. But we also did see under Biden, also Trump 1.0, support for Taiwan when Taiwan was losing diplomatic allies. And so I think, for example, in this case, the U.S. making a statement does indicate continued support for Taiwan's participation meaningfully internationally.
Does it represent a change in the U.S.'s stance towards Taiwan, or is it just the communication of it?
It could be the communication of it, but it's very hard to know.
We can show the three documents that are mentioned: the 1943 Cairo Declaration, the 1945 Potsdam, and the 1951 San Francisco Treaty. So when the AIT in Taiwan says none of these documents determine Taiwan's ultimate political status, can you describe what that means?
Yeah, so it is a question of whose sovereignty then Taiwan belongs to, because, for example, the documents do say that it is turned over, but then who it goes to is actually not specifically stated. And so there's all this room for contestation between Taiwan and China. And then,
so China says that these documents say that Taiwan is part of China.
Yes, and it also claimed that this is a UN resolution, actually.
Right. Professor Yuan, there's a very good point that Brian made that they tried to say, the Chinese that is, that this is all part of the post-World War order, and that to not agree with it, to reject it, means to reject that post-war international rules-based order.
Let me offer you one neglect element, historical element. That is a bilateral treaty, which was signed in 1952 amongst Taiwan and Japan, Republic of China and Taiwan. Republic of China and Japan, the Treaty of Peace Treaty. Now we are able to read the diary of Chiang Kai-shek. Let me share with you one important date. That is before the signing of the Sino-Japan Peace Treaty on March 25th. Let me quote. Chiang Kai-shek said in his diary, "The word sovereignty within the scope of interpretation has not yet been discussed. I think that as long as Taiwan is our existing territory, there is no need to fight for the word sovereignty."
It's interesting, Brian, though, isn't it? Because there is that perspective in Taiwan that according to the Cairo Declaration of 1943, that Taiwan was returned to the Republic of China. So not the PRC, but the Republic of China, which is now on Taiwan. However, I think the AIT was actually saying something different. The AIT's statement was saying that none of these documents determined Taiwan's ultimate political status. So they would seem to be saying that these are not legal treaties, they're not legal documents. And then the 1951 San Francisco Treaty said that Japan was to renounce Taiwan along with the other territory, but didn't say who to. So therefore, is that correct, my reading of it? Is that why the AIT is saying that Taiwan's status, effectively saying Taiwan's status is undetermined?
Yeah, that's right. And that was, I think, the U.S. position historically in that sense, because of the fact that the U.S. had much more wiggle room. And if Taiwan is not specified where, after Japan renounces sovereignty, where it goes to. But in this sense, I think also a lot of the contemporary discourse in Taiwan from the Lai administration is, again, not emphasizing these treaties, but again, contemporary democratization. Maybe perhaps AIT is just going along with that in that sense.
Professor Yuan, okay, I know you want to jump in on a point, but when Nauru, which was, I think, the last diplomatic ally that Taiwan lost in 2024, January, switched to China, it said, at the time, it recognizes that there is only one China in the world, governed by the People's Republic of China, and that Taiwan is an inalienable part of China. So it was essentially quoting China's one China principle. This is the danger, isn't it?
I do not believe it will create additional fatal blow to Taiwan, because Taiwan has been already get used to it, all right, after its departure from United Nations. So we've been struggling with the definition of who is representing China legally at the United Nations for decades. Now, I think the Beijing set the tone, set the standard, set the principle that there's only one China, all right? But the two sides of Taiwan Strait has managed to coexist for some times as how to interpret it, what does China meant, okay, whether it's the RSC or PRC. But there's another important element I like to reiterate, that is a very sentiments, all right? I think the China fears about the Taiwanese independent sentiment, all right? Whatever they are engaged in forcefully now is to counter the Taiwanese independent sentiment, all right? So this is something that you could not control, and yet they have to demonstrate their way to deal with this. In order to, legitimize their existence, they have also audience, domestic audience to address.
Now, following China's massive PLA military parade, US Secretary of War Pete Hegseth called his counterpart Dong Jun, and according to the US readout, Secretary Hegseth made clear that the United States does not seek conflict with China, nor is it pursuing regime change or strangulation of the PRC. At the same time, however, he forthrightly relayed that the US has vital interests in the Asia-Pacific, the priority theater, and will resolutely protect those interests. This is a Chinese account. China's complete unification is an unstoppable historical trend, and any plan and interference to help independence with force and control China with Taiwan will be thwarted. It even says China is committed to working with regional countries to maintain peace and stability in the South China Sea, and firmly opposes the infringement and provocation of individual countries. Right. Does the US statement reassure allies in the Indo-Pacific and particularly Taiwan, coming after an unconfirmed Politico report which said that the US was going to pivot away from China and this region?
Yeah, it's interesting because the Politico report referred to Elbridge Colby as the one that hoped to see this occur. And Colby, for example, is quite well known these days because he is the one that stopped US arms shipments to Ukraine. And Donald Trump did not know about this, and he found out about it, and then arms shipments resumed. But he has long made controversial statements, for example, calling for TSMC to be bombed in wartime, for example, calling for increasing the defense budget to 10%, which is very difficult considering that's already 1/4 of government spending. Even increasing 2% to 3.5 is quite difficult.
But Colbridge's argument was always we need to pivot away from Europe so we can focus on China.
Which is interesting because then the possibility is he's actually not really hoping to do that. He's more isolationist because the US perhaps withdrawing back to its own hemisphere, multipolarism, allowing China to have its own reign in the Asia-Pacific while the US is more influential closer to home.
That's if we believe the Politico report,
yes,
which, the defense report hasn't actually come out yet. So are you saying that the statement by Hegseth seems to reinforce the Politico report?
It seems to counter it, but I think there's multiple forces in the Trump administration. And even if someone like Colby says he wants to step up US commitment to countering China, he may in fact hope to do the opposite and in fact looking for pretext to do that. And so it is to be seen, but I think it is also, if anything, the Trump administration has many conflicting political forces internally, and perhaps that does reflect this.
Professor Yuan, how should we view the Taiwan Strait transits? We've recently had a whole barrage of them, really. We had, first of all, Canada and Australia, and then China sailed its third aircraft carrier, the Fujian, through. Directly after that, there was the US and Britain.
Those becomes a monthly or quarterly practice, all right, amongst the US allies to patrol this Taiwan Strait to demonstrate that this is international water, could be accommodated with the innocent passage. I met with the Colby in 2013 in Beijing. We attend the symposium, international symposium on arms control and strategic stability. I think that what fears then worries then now is there's a lacking of stable strategic stability between the United States. What is the lacking of is all the channel being shut down. There is no institutional face-to-face communication means by which both sides could address their question to one another. I think this is his remarks reflect on the anxiety from the U.S. side. Likewise, Dong Jun respond accordingly. I think what is needed, I suspect, this might pave way for the forthcoming summit. All right, this constitute the elements to be addressed at the highest level.
Right, and if you could also address, Professor, the third aircraft carrier. What's the significance of that in terms of Taiwan's security?
All right. Meaning they're enlarged their fleet, all right? By enlarging the fleet, they're able to foster even more credible battle force surrounding Taiwan.
And many people, when the new carriers was coming out, the news about them, their development, Professor, they were saying that why does China need aircraft carriers to attack Taiwan? It's so close. So the reason why a third carrier is significant, you talked about surrounding Taiwan, is that to prevent access from, say, the Western Pacific?
For China to transform itself from the land-based power to maritime one, it requires numbers of their naval forces.
Yeah, okay. Now, facing China's growing military pressure, Taiwan has issued an updated civil defense handbook to prepare the public for crises, including war. Taiwan is also carrying out patrols of its subsea cables to counter Chinese sabotage, as well as accelerating other aspects of defense, such as the indigenous defense submarine program and increasing asymmetric arms acquisitions. Brian, let's deal with the handbook first. Why is this so important for Taiwan right now? And obviously, you've taken a look at it. What jumped out at you?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so interesting is using many graphics, actually, and not just photographs, cartoons and so forth, to make it kind of easily understandable. You will have different age demographics that may need this in wartime, whether they're young people, they're older people. So it needs to be easy to understand, and I think having it readily available. I think also issuing more handbooks and updating it, because things do change. Capacities of militaries or scenarios of invasion may change, and what people need to learn about as well. And so I think having it as a regular issued and easily available handbook, that does help. And it takes place at a time, of course, there's much more attention to civil defense and getting ready for what to do, to have a grab bag in your home and have some knowledge of what to do in case the hostilities break out.
Is it a watershed moment in that it brings that possibility, that reality much closer to us, to Taiwanese?
It's a good question. I mean, I think public messaging about this kind of knowledge is very necessary. For example, you do have the air raid shelter signs everywhere, and that's not always seen as the most helpful, in fact. And so having this as a handbook in a digestible form, that I think is crucial. But it needs to be more than just one handbook, rather. It's knowledge that needs to be disseminated much more widely.
And perhaps there needs to be, I mean, Taiwan has, through its Hangguang exercise, expanded to more of a civilian defense. Are you saying that there more needs to be done alongside all of this?
Absolutely, and I think having, for example, then drills take place in supermarkets. Sometimes it is actually theater for the public, but then having these kind of images and then demonstrations for the public, that can be very helpful, in fact.
Professor Yuan, final question. The cable patrols, why are these so important? What are the risks associated with the way that China can threaten Taiwan through these cables?
Well, it's already happened, all right? So cables are a lifeline for Taiwan, that's for sure. Undersea fiber optic cables performs as needed functions for finance, commerce, communication, military purpose as well. So it's a threat, ongoing threat. In order to dilute, if not totally wipe out this the potential risk for the Great Long tactics, I think it's about time for Taiwan to operationalize the means through which they could perform daily inspection on each point that needs to be strengthened. I think this is, I would say this is more important than the handbook.
Right, okay. A very interesting perspective. Thank you so much to both, I guess, Yuan Yi and Brian Hu for joining Taiwan Talks. If you liked our show, please search for us on YouTube, give us a thumbs up and hit subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching the show today. Stay safe and see you next time.